The Gifted Education Update is intended to launch us on a good school year, thinking together. I'm delighted that we will begin with a message from Dr. Jason Glass, Commissioner of Education at the Kentucky Department of Education.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Glass, Kentucky's Education Commissioner and Chief Learner, and I'm honored to be able to welcome our gifted and talented educators back for the 2021-22 school year. I want to thank the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education and the Center for Gifted Studies at Western Kentucky University for hosting this Gifted Education Update. The last 18 months have affected all of us, but one of the biggest impacts we experienced was the services offered to our gifted students. As we begin this school year, our educators, schools, and districts must continue to ensure that they provide all children an equitable opportunity to receive gifted services. Although offering some of these services was a challenge in the past, over the past couple of years, you continue to find ways to provide what your students needed. You introduced virtual platforms to offer enrichment activities, group discussion, and check-ins on the social and emotional needs of your students. I encourage you not to fall back on the traditional ways of delivering instruction and to continue to find new and innovative methods to reach your students. As you're all aware, our gifted and talented students have special needs that must be met in order for them to reach their full potential academically, socially, and emotionally. Providing gifted students with appropriate services maintains their engagement in learning. It allows them to reach mastery of the content and provides more opportunities for enrichment and acceleration. These opportunities also assist Kentucky students in reaching their full potential and prepares them for a future career. From all of us at the Kentucky Department of Education, welcome back and have a great school year.
I think that Dr. Glass mentioned many things that are really important to us. The delivery of services obviously is crucial for our students who are gifted and talented. And although many of those services did continue during the last 14 months, a few of them, or maybe many of them, did not. And I love the fact that Dr. Glass was talking about the special needs of gifted students. One of the things that many people don't understand and need to be reminded of is the fact that the needs of gifted children are many times created by their strengths rather than by some deficit. Consequently, gifted students may not look needy. However, they are indeed needy. So we can share with our colleagues this important information. And we're grateful for Dr. Glass for starting us off in such a positive way today. Kathy Anderson is our spokesperson at the Kentucky Department of Education. Her focus is on gifted education. And Kathy, I welcome you to our Gifted Education Update.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I really appreciate being here today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and to talk and to give some technical assistance today and to share some resources. So give me just a second to share my screen here. Can you see my screen okay?
Good to go.
Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that. So good morning, everyone. I am the Gifted Education Program Consultant for the Kentucky Department of Education. Welcome again to the Gifted Education Update. I want to thank KAGE and WKU for this opportunity to speak and to answer any questions that you may have about Gifted Education program in our state. So first up is an update about the council. So in our state, we have a state advisory council for gifted and talented education. And this was first created, I believe, in legislation by Governor Paul Patton. Members are appointed by the governor and serve 2 to 3 years. The purpose of the council is to make recommendations regarding the provision of educational services for gifted and talented students in the Commonwealth. There are 20 voting members and 3 non-voting members. Recently, we had some new members who were appointed by the governor's office to the advisory council. And as you can see on this slide, there are several new members, like I said before. We have Brenda Martin, who is representing parent and school council members. We have Mason Dyer, who's representing independent colleges in post-secondary. We have Tiffany Marshall, who's representing principals from elementary and middle. We have Dr. Kimberly Code, who is representing a post-secondary institution. We have Jean Lee, who many of you may know. She is from Eastern Kentucky, Harlan County, who is representing gifted and talented coordinators. We have Jonathan Haynes, who is representing local boards of education. And we have Hannah England, who some of you may know from Russell County, who is also representing gifted and talented coordinators. We still have some vacancies on the advisory council board. We need two teachers, one to represent elementary and middle. Katie Booth is still serving as a teacher. She is a full-time GT teacher in Scott County, and she's representing high school teachers at this time. We need two parents of GT students. We also need a superintendent, a high school principal, someone for visual and performing arts, and someone from private business. So if you are interested in applying for any of these positions, or if you have applied and not heard anything, I would recommend that you contact Lindsay Bloom, who works at the governor's office. There is a application that I've hyperlinked there, and I can share this, or it will be posted to the KAGE webpage where you can click on that application and go there and apply if you like. And there is Lindsay Bloom's contact information. So she is the one to contact because, like I said before, it is the governor's office who appoints these different representations for the advisory council. So I'll just stop just for a second and see if there are any questions. If not, then I will move on. All right. I don't know if I can see the chat box or not. So,
We don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tyler. All right. So let me just talk a little bit about state consolidated monitoring. So let me just give you a short history about state consolidated monitoring. So several years ago, Dr. Holliday, who was a commissioner at the time, thought it would be a good idea for the different programs to go at one time and visit districts for monitoring rather than being in districts off and on all during the school year. He felt that was very disruptive to have people from the State Department visiting districts, and he thought it'd be best for us to be in and out in 1 week rather than being sprinkled all through the school year. So during the history of monitoring, there have been 7 to 14 districts who've been chosen for monitoring. Lately, we have settled on the number of 10 districts, and we visit in different districts between about mid-January to sometimes the end of April, 1st of May. Last year was virtual. We did not visit in person due to the pandemic. And this year, we're planning to visit districts in person, but due to the rise in COVID cases, this may change or become a hybrid visit of some kind. The beginning of the year training, which I hope to schedule very soon, will cover in detail this monitoring process. But I wanted to share with you some of the takeaways and data from this past year's monitoring. So first of all will be procedures. This is something I want to talk about just for a second. So there is a difference between policies and procedures, and our regulation states that we have to have policies and procedures for each section in the regulation. So you have to realize that there's a difference between procedures and policies. The procedures different, and they give specific steps for how the policy is going to be carried out. And it lists who's going to be responsible, what and how the action should be carried out, and when it should be completed. So that's really important to know. So if you've got a chance, I know school has started, but be looking at those at your policies and procedures to see if they meet that criteria. Also, identification criteria. This is something that's very important, and districts need to review the specific criteria in the regulation for the different categories, especially for creativity and leadership and visual and performing arts. We seem to have some discrepancies across the state in how we identify for those areas. Also, identification documentation. It is really important to document and to put that information into a folder to document that identification for students, especially when a student transfers to another district. It's important that the previous district be able to send that information to the new district to share with them that information, so they have that information on file. Then another area that we noticed that needs to be provided some more technical assistance and support about is the annual program evaluation. This is a really important part of our program because it allows us to share and to collect data about our program to share with the others in our district. Our supervisors, the superintendent, school boards, the local school board, maybe your site-based council. So just remember that each year, a district has to conduct and document their annual program evaluation. It's important to ensure that all the components listed in the regulation in Section 5 are covered. So check your policies and procedures and make sure that you've got, a procedures in place that this is conducted every year. And also check your policies and procedures to see if you need to share this with the site-based decision-making councils in your district and the local Board of Education. Another topic that kind of came to the surface during monitoring was service delivery options. Remember that each primary talent pool and GT student must receive a minimum of 2 services or multiple services. That's how KDE interprets it, multiple as 2 services. These services must be provided within the regular school day, with the exception of academic competitions or extracurricular activities. And last but not least, another area that came to light that we need to focus on is professional development. Please remember that all staff working with gifted students, not just your staff who are, gifted and talented certified and who've been assigned to provide services for students, they're not the only ones who need to receive professional development. We need to remember that this professional development is to help them serve those students so that they know how to serve their needs and their interests and abilities. And the district should create a list of all the staff who work with gifted students and ensure they have provided appropriate professional development. Professional development could address topics such as how to differentiate instruction and how to meet the social emotional needs of gifted students. Next, I want to talk just for a few minutes about the National Symposium on Equity for Black and Brown students, Black and Brown gifted students that the National Association for Gifted Children hosted this year. This was their first symposium, and they said that this will be something that they will be doing annually. This was a 3-day symposium. It's going to be really hard to boil down those 3 days into just kind of an overview. But I do want you to know there are many passionate speakers and beliefs about what is needed for our Black and Brown gifted students. I'm going to focus on 3 areas here. I'm going to talk about the social emotional needs of our Black and Brown students, identification practices that were posed, and also some thoughts moving forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is the imposter syndrome. This is a feeling where a person feels like they can't be themselves, that they don't belong. And so one of our speakers, Dr. Woods from San Francisco, said this was something that he experienced as a young Black American student growing up. He gave the example of when he went on and got a scholarship to Harvard to continue some post-secondary education. And when he got to Harvard, he really felt like he didn't fit in. He didn't look like the other people there at Harvard. And he just felt like had this imposter syndrome that he talked about. Also, there was another speaker that said that she had worked with 2 Hispanic students during her career, and she said that these students also felt this syndrome, this imposter syndrome, that they couldn't be who they were. They stopped speaking Spanish in their home because they felt like that they needed to be more like their other peers at school. So this is something to be aware of that our students of brown and black color experience. Also suspensions, as you can see from the graph there, our students, black males are suspended three times more than their white peers. Also, Latino males are suspended seven times more. So this is something that, we need to be aware of, because if our students from black and brown cultures or ethnicities are being suspended, how can we identify them? And also, as you know, there's that myth that students who have to be good to be gifted. And we know that that's not true, but that's that's a myth that we need to dispel. And that it's really important for us to be looking for these students and be figuring out, well, why are they being suspended? Is it because they are, not engaged in school? They don't have the services they need? Another thing that was talked about was cultural responsiveness. So building a culturally responsive culture from all nationalities is important to help students feel included. Lessons that include stories about different cultures and literature from authors of many cultural backgrounds can help students see themselves in the literature and the curriculum. And it can also open the minds of students, to all students, to understanding other cultures. And then the last thing is relationships. And we know that this is really important for all students. It's especially important for black and brown students, for them to have someone who really sees them for who they are. And it's important for them to have a relationship with someone who cares about them and values them. So another important takeaway was identification methods during the symposium. And there was quite a bit of talk about disproportionality. So the disproportionality across the state that you see here that we're going to talk about, of course, is our black and brown students. And when we looked at the data, we saw that there's a disproportionality in all the different states across the U.S. except for Montana for black and brown students as far as being represented in gifted programs. And Dr. Donna Ford, who's a nationally known GT speaker and educator, reports using the civil rights regulation of 80% or equal opportunity. She said, for example, if a district has 40% Hispanic students in the total population, the GT population should roughly equal that. She said there could be a 20% discrepancy allowed for cultural differences and for those not wanting to participate in the program. So this would mean that there should be about 32% Hispanic students in the gifted program. Unfortunately, she said, due to bias, many people believe it's best if teachers are not the sole staff who nominate students for the gifted program. And as you know, in our state, that is not the sole basis for, students being identified. But we do have a lot of teachers who recommend and who are part of that process. And so it's really important for them to understand, what to be looking for when we identify students. That it may not be, like I said before, our good students, but our students who are really passionate about a subject, students who need to go further, take a deeper dive, or maybe need to accelerate, maybe need to move through the curriculum at a quicker pace. So another thing that was brought up was universal screening. This was talked about by several different education experts in the field. Dr. Scott Peters talked about it. Dr. Naglieri was there at the symposium, and Dr. Ford. And they stated that using universal screening, using a nonverbal assessment, is believed to be a better way of finding talented students from underrepresented populations. They said cognitive assessments that assess verbal acuity may sometimes be biased because the terminology or examples may be unfamiliar to some of the students from whom they are being assessed with. So those are some of the takeaways that I saw from identification from the symposium. I want to kind of apply this to our state here. This is a screenshot from the Q&A, which I think stands for Quality Assurance Gifted and Talented Report for the state that you can run in Infinite Campus. The report calculates GT program and total student enrollment percentages for student population groups. And you can run a detailed report that gives student level data, or you can run an aggregate report, which generates an overall view of the program. There are 3 different pages to the aggregate report, and I'm just going to review page 1. And so let me just point out some of the things that you can see from this report that's really good. So as you can see, we have about, when I took this report in August 15th, we had about 70,000 students. And then overall, in our total enrollment, we had 622,000 plus students. And you can see that there are a gifted and talented column, and there's a total enrollment column, and the percentages in each of those as you look at the numerical values. And I should have highlighted also our other special population groups down there, free and reduced price meals and students with an IEP and our English learners. It's important to look at all of your percentages just to get an overall view, in your district. And you can run this either a district view or you can run it from a school level view. And so, as I said before, according to Dr. Ford, we should be looking for roughly the same percentages of our GT students in our program to the total student enrollment in our districts or in our state. And as I said before, there may be some difference. And Dr. Ford mentioned there could be, about a 20% discrepancy. And so this data may assist in discussing, potential barriers in screening and identification procedures and give you, a jumping off point in talking with your selection and placement committees and your supervisors or other staff in your district about the program. This is just another way to look at the data in our state. And as you can see, we have, a large population of white students in our program. And we have, not as many perhaps in some of our other ethnicities. We have a large number of free and reduced price meal students in our state. Here's
Kathy,
another.
If you go back to that report.
Yes.
Lisa has asked, can Infinite Campus be the tool that runs this report for her school statistics?
Yes. And you can have permissions to use this tool. This is a gifted and talented report. So I would think if you were a gifted and talented staff person, you should be allowed to have, permissions to run this report.
Thank you.
No problem. So this is just a simple spreadsheet calculation, that I use just to see where our discrepancies might be for the state. And as you can see, we've got about 6.2% of our state is African American, and our total enrollment of African American students is about 10.75, almost 11%. So, discrepancy of 20% would be about 2.15%. But, when you apply the calculation, we have 4.5. So is there a larger discrepancy than 20%? Yes. Also, for our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, we don't have very many of those in our state. In our GT program, we have 0.11%. Across the state, we have about 0.14. There is a slight discrepancy there. When we look at our free and reduced price meal students, we have 37% in the GT program, and we have 60% across the state. And so this is a 20% would be about 12.11. You apply that to the gap, and we've got a 23% difference between GT and the total. So that gives us a greater than 20% gap. And I won't belabor the point, but as you can see, this is true for our students with disabilities. There's a 11% difference there, and our English learners 3.64% difference. And you could run something simple like this, you know, in your own. It's just simple, you know, simple math. So again, I just want to talk about, you know, screening um, and our regulation and equity. And our regulation is a good regulation because it does allow for equity. So when you look at section 3.3 in our regulations, it talks about there have to be procedures for screening and identification, which provide equal access for students with disabilities, ethnic minority children, and disadvantaged children. You know, we must have procedures in place for that. And also section 4.2 of our regulation talks about that our school personnel must take into consideration environmental, cultural, and disabling conditions which may mask a student's true abilities that might exclude students. And it gives some examples such as exceptional children, those children that have an IEP, disadvantaged children. This can be economically disadvantaged or culturally disadvantaged, or underachieving children, those students who show that they can score at high levels, but perhaps their performance in school doesn't match what they are capable of. So just some things to be thinking about. So thoughts moving forward. This was a graph that was presented during the symposium by Drs. Ford and Drs. Whiting. And as you can see, you've got, when we have those conversations that, you know, gender conversations aren't very hard to have, age conversations, but as you move up the pyramid, you know, talking about race is one of the most uncomfortable types of conversations to have. But it's really important that we talk about race and how it affects, you know, our gifted program, and that we want to make sure that we are including all students in our program. So it's really important that we push the boundaries of discomfort, you know, and make change if change is needed. We need to make sure that all of our students are being seen and heard. You know, when I grew up as a child, children were to be seen and not heard. But it's so important for students to feel like they have a place and have a person that they can talk to. We need to look at our policies and procedures and make sure that if there are barriers, that we remove them. That if we have policies in place that are providing equity for students, that we are implementing those with fidelity. Also, that we have relevance and rigor in relationships. There was an article called Lost in America created from some professors at Peabody University, and they created some small learning communities to address these new 3 R's of education: relevance, relationships, rigor. And in this model, 9th graders entered a separate academy, and teachers followed a set of group of students throughout their high school careers, challenging them to think and linking academic content to their real-time life experiences. Also, local norms and building norms. It's important. Said the people from the Equity Symposium, these nationally known educators and researchers, that we look at local norms. They said local norms are very important for creating equity in schools as we administer assessments. And that when you use them, building norms really help us to find those diamonds in the rough that may be sparkling at schools that we don't see if we're just using national norms or if we're just applying local norms to our district. So there are some thoughts about the symposium that I wanted to share with you. So are there any questions, Tyler, that people had in the chat that I couldn't see?
Kathy, I think that it's Trish. She's asked, we use the LSAT as a universal screener. Would you recommend looking only at the nonverbal score on this assessment, or would you recommend administering a specific nonverbal screener to our special populations?
Well, according to the experts, it's really important to use a nonverbal assessment. But I know that assessments can be really be expensive to purchase. And so I think it would be good to look at those subscores if you're using the LSAT. And since it's a screening measure, you know, we're not trying to identify, we are just trying to screen students for the program. So I think it would be really important to see if there's a, you know, a discrepancy, especially between their verbal scores and their nonverbal scores. You know, that might create a flag of some kind. Or if you're looking at their verbal scores and maybe their processing. Some of our assessments have a processing score. And I know when talking with Dr. Ed Amon over the years, when we're looking for our special education students, that can be, a flag to help us find our twice exceptional students, is that they have, high verbal acuity, but maybe their processing score is not as fast. So that's a really good question. I hope I answered that. I think that you should look at all the different parts of that test. And I think that looking at the nonverbal scores could help you, find some students that might be missed.
Another question from Bryn is, did they recommend specific nonverbal assessments that are available? I think you mentioned the Naglieri.
Yes. Like I said before, I forget Dr. Naglieri's first name. I'm sorry, I think it's John.
Yeah.
But he was there, and there were several different educators there and prominent people that thought that was a good assessment to use. Being at KDE, I need to be a non-biased person and just tell you, what was talked about. But the Naglieri or the NNAT was mentioned several times. But I know that there are other nonverbal assessments too. And, remember that, when we're screening students, we don't necessarily have to use an assessment. There can be other procedures that are implemented, such as jot downs, screeners, scales. Those types of instruments could be used rather than using a full-blown, assessment. I think even the KOGAT has got a screener that can be used now. So good question. Anything else?
And another more general question, will your slides be available for participants?
Yes.
Okay.
I've sent those to you, Tyler. So if you want to post those on the KAGE webpage, you could do that.
Perfect. That's all we have for now.
Okay. I'll keep moving forward. All right. So just really quickly, some strategies to encourage equity and identification. As you can see, this is a cycle, because as educators, we're always reflecting, trying to make things better, right? So at least once a year, I would say look at your policies and procedures, make sure that you're implementing them with fidelity. If you're looking at your data and there seems to be some discrepancies, some large discrepancies there, like Dr. Ford said, that over that 20% discrepancy, you might want to look at your procedures and see if there's something that needs to be tweaked. So this begins by reviewing the data, like I said before, looking at your identification procedures, using various assessments, perhaps using, jot down forms. We have jot down forms that are in the Gifted and Talented Coordinator Sample Handbook. These are sample forms. They can be modified to fit whatever district that you're in if you feel like they need to be tweaked. I know I was listening to a presentation by Dr. Tambaugh yesterday. She was talking about identifying students from rural areas. And she said sometimes when we identify our students from rural areas, those characteristics that we have for a typical student, they may need to be tweaked a little bit for our rural students. She said we need to see, are there leaders that are in our 4-H communities? Are there leaders at our churches or synagogues? She talked about that there is a lot of things that go on in the community where we can see students. And so those jot downs might need to be tweaked a little bit. Also, that we need to share our characteristics of special students from special populations with those who are helping us to identify them. Need to share a look for list with our staff to help us, because many of us are just one person in the district and we need all the help that we can get to make sure that we don't miss anybody in our district for gifted services. All right, so reminders and resources here. I'll try to go quickly through these because I feel like maybe I've run over my time, and I apologize for that if I have. So we have lots of different things just to be thinking about. So multiple criteria. Remember that the gifted regulation states multiple criteria have to be gathered for identifying a student. Don't forget again about our creativity, leadership in visual arts and performing arts students. Remember to look again at the identification criteria for that. Remember, we need a minimum of 3 3 evidences. They should be different evidences. We want to look at the whole child. We don't want to just be looking at data from assessments, although looking at data from assessments can be good. On that point, just remember that primary talent pool, we want to be as inclusive as possible. You can't use an assessment to keep a student out of the primary talent pool. Remember that it shouldn't be up to just one person in the district to be selecting and placing students. That's the purpose of the GT Selection and Placement Committee. And also remember that in our regulation, we can use local or national norms. Those are just some quick reminders on that. Here are some resources I want to make you aware of. Mentors. I'm going to start the mentor program again this year, and that'll be something that I'll be talking about at the new GT coordinator training, which is September the 17th. If you haven't signed up for that, I'll be sending that out, that registration link out again in the Touch Base Tuesday email. Remember that there are regional GT Cadres across the state that you can join, and I'll be sharing that information with you just a second about where those are across the state. Those are awfully important for a new person, even a veteran person. There's so many resources and ideas and thoughts that are shared there so that you don't feel like an island unto yourself. Like I said before, we have a new GT coordinator training coming up. It's September the 17th from 10 to noon. We also started last year a GT cadre leader meetings. These are meetings that are held once a month from the different leaders from the different cadres across the state. We meet to talk about concerns and questions that you might have. We have a Touch Base Tuesday email that comes out the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of each month that I try to give resources and timely topics and also opportunities that are coming forward. And then we will also be having a GT beginning and end of year training this year. Here are the different regional cadres across the state and those people who are the leaders for those cadres. And I'll be sharing this with Tyler. This will be posted where you can see this, or if you, want more information, just let me know. But Central Kentucky, we've got Michelle Kaysen. Leanne Pickerel has stepped down just because she's got some new duties that she has picked up this year. She is the principal at one of the schools. And so Michelle will be carrying that torch this year. Michelle, I apologize, I misspelled your name. It needs an E on the end there. Sorry about that. At GREC, we've got Abby Lentz. Jefferson County, Jessica Thompson. At KEDC, Susan Williams. KVAC is Jean Lee, who I talked about before. She's also on the advisory council. The Lake Cumberland region, Beth Patrick. The Northern Kentucky region is Heather Hicks. Ohio Valley region is Melissa Rash, and I also need to add on there. I'm having a senior moment here. I'll think of it in a second. And the Western Kentucky region is Toddy Adams and Kathy Carver. So if you are looking for a resource, meetings to join and have some good resources and some networking camaraderie, please join up with one of these.
Kathy, there's a question about how to get added to the Touch Base Tuesday emails.
Yes, just send me an email and I'll add you to the GT contact list. All right. Just really quickly, I want to touch on title funds. So title funds can be used for the GT program. You need to remember that this needs to be a documented need. Usually this is a documented need that's shown in your CDIP and CSIPs. And I sent Tyler a kind of a 1 or 2 page document that outlines this more in detail. So hopefully Tyler can send that out to all the participants today. It's a document that was given to me by the Continuous Improvement Office. They did a presentation at one of our advisory councils last year. So just really quickly, Title 1, Part A is to improve academic achievement for disadvantaged students. Part C supplements supports to migrant students. Part D is for our children and youth in state institutions, neglected and delinquent children. Then Title II provides supplemental training to support identification and implementing instructional practices. Title III, Part A, can help teachers learn how to identify ELs for GT services. Part 4, Title IV, Part A, can support GT programs, activities, and services. Title IV, Part B, can serve students who struggle academically, experience chronic absenteeism. And I'm sure that you can see students in all of these different programs that might be served by these funds. Due to COVID, you know, these are funds that have to be applied for, usually through the GMAP system, the grant managing system. And I know that this system is open now for some of these programs. So please contact your title coordinator over these programs, or maybe contact your supervisor who can contact these people to be looking to see if these are funds that you could take advantage of, so that you could have this money in addition to the GT grant that comes out once a year.
Kathy, there's a question from Lisa, whether one of these title programs can be used to hire a GT teacher for a school.
I do believe so. I believe the Title II funds can be used for that. So I would reach out to your Title II program coordinator, and just remember that anytime you use these funds, there has to be a documented need. You'd have to show that through your, usually through the CSIP or CDIP is where that's documented. Good question. These are some webpage resources. You know, if you go to the KDE webpage and just type in gifted, our page will come up. There's lots of different resources there for primary talent pool, for the regulations. There's past, beginning of the year and end of year trainings there. National Association for Gifted Children has many great resources. They have a conference that's coming up soon in November. Of course, we have our great Kentucky Association for Gifted Education advocacy group here in our state. Please make sure you know, if you haven't, that you join up. There are so many great things that you can be a part of for a very small membership fee. And then, of course, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, saying they have great webinars on how to support those needs of gifted children that come out, and good information from their articles and webpage as well. So I'll just take a few minutes and see if there's any questions. All right.
I think you have covered all of the questions so far.
Okay, awesome. So there's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. I will try to answer your questions within at least 24 hours. Sometimes I have to think about them, because y'all can ask some really poignant questions at times, or give me a call. That's my phone number right there. Always glad to hear from you guys. Hope you have a great school year. And I know that, you know, we may have to pivot very quickly, but just know that I'm here to support you if you need anything. Thank you so much again for this opportunity to speak.
Kathy, thank you ever so much. You've provided lots of information. I want to highlight that there's probably more money out in school districts right now because of recovery funds that have been disseminated. So there are specific directions for using ESSER funds for gifted students. So don't be afraid to be a part of what the system is doing, because meeting the needs of gifted students is certainly a part of that, as it is with the title funds. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.